Political infighting. There is nothing more refreshing and exciting than watching two people who identify with the same specific group tearing each other apart over some very specific issues and sending death threats to each other. And if you have been part of the online political scene and even politics in general, there is one kind of infighting that is so frequent and memorable that it has become its very own iron law. That kind of infighting is none other than leftist infighting.
I don't care. Wait, law? What are you, a fucking liberal?
Everything I said about Biden is true, you fucking idiot!
Stop!
Wait,
the evidence.
I'm gonna ban all of you! Let me fucking finish my fucking statements!
Pretty much every time I deal with dipshits from the left and the trans girls, that I notice there's a vastly disproportionate amount of dumb fuck lefty things.
So, why is this kind of infighting so prominent and well known? Well, it is because of the simple fact that for some odd reason, people who identify with the left side of the political spectrum have a tendency to really fight among each other, oftentimes even more so than against their dreadful and fascistic right-wing counterparts. Compared to the left wing, the right wing never really had such big problems with infighting, and are generally chill with each other. Of course, the right wing is far from united, and the most prominent infightings you could come across is when the more authoritarian right starts going after the libertarians and vice versa. But when it is the status quo, the different variants of the right, at worst, tolerate each other's existence or give some mean looks here and there. The left wing, on the other hand, is almost constantly in conflict with itself, as you have the likes of anarchists, communists, moderate socialists, and liberal progressives squabbling over whose ideology will bring about heaven on earth and whose is an evil subversion meant to turn everyone into slaves of the 1%. Like that one time when Vaush argued that voting and electing a semi-progressive candidate is better than having an anti-progressive authoritarian president in charge. Seems fair enough, right? Well, the BreadTube subreddit went absolutely ballistic over that take, even leading to one of the moderators resigning and every single one of the 1.7 thousand comments being deleted. I don't even want to say it's not like, but literally, they won't even fathom the idea of working with someone who has slightly different takes from you on a matter. But the most burning question is, why is this the case? Why exactly is the left wing so prone to infighting compared to the right wing? What exactly makes the left special in this case? Well, there are three reasons: ideological foundation, worldview, and moral psychology. Let's go over each one step by step. When you want to connect with a person and form a sort of bond with them, it is pretty essential that you find common ground with them, something you guys both are or believe in, and more than often, when you find people like this, you would want to stick around them. This is a basic animal instinct we share with many social animals. It drives us to be around people who are like us, whether it's in terms of social status, interests, preferences, race, political beliefs, cultural background, wealth, or even gender. And even when you encounter someone who has some disagreements with you, oftentimes you could reconcile with them by finding this common ground. For example, if both of you do not see eye to eye on some political matters, you could still be united by something greater, like a religion, race, or culture. And since both of you share this greater cause, most of the time you could overlook these petty personal beliefs. But now imagine that the only thing you could find common ground on with a person is ideology, the only thing you really care about. Yeah, and this is where the issue arises. People who identify with the left wing don't particularly care about things like ethnicity, culture, and religion. Instead, they often place a stronger emphasis on ideological purity and political beliefs. This can become a significant source of conflict because when ideology is the primary or sole basis for unity, even minor differences in opinion or strategy can lead to the powder keg exploding. Without the broader unifying factors of shared culture or religion, or really anything else, left-wing groups may find it harder to overlook these ideological differences. Each faction believes that their version of the ideology is the correct one, and that deviations are not just minor differences, but fundamental betrayals of the cause. Ideology isn't just a small thing for them, it is the only thing that defines who they are. That is why you will see more radical ideologies like communism put such a strong emphasis on rooting out these so-called revisionists. Oh, you prefer Trotsky over Stalin? Yep, you're a filthy revisionist who is about to get shot. Leddihn, in his book Menace of the Herd, calls these kinds of people herdists, as he would write, quote, "The more primitive a person is, in terms of character, the more they're influenced by this herd instinct. It leads them to seek out people who are similar to them and to strictly follow the group's written or unwritten rules. The typical herdist avoids original thinking or actions to maintain the uniformity that they value so much. If someone in the group does something different or independent, the herdist will quickly oppose them to protect the sacred unity of the group. The loyal herdist won't confront the offender alone. They'll gather support from others in the group to create a collective protest. This collective action will force the lone individual to either conform or leave." Let me show what I am talking about here. If you enter almost any popular leftist, especially communist Discord server, alongside having the usual rule of no reactionary is allowed, you're also met with a dreadful verification system, where you have to write a 5-page fucking essay. How do you define capitalism, socialism, communism? Explain how these methods of organization work. Explain these leftist concepts. Cite a few positives of leftist movements. What are your thoughts on blah 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 blah? I don't know whether I'm trying to join a Discord server or sending a scholarship application to the Goethe University. Look at the Spanish Civil War as a prime example of this. There is a pretty good reason why the nationalists managed to come out on top and crush the Republicans. The nationalists were far from being united ideologically, but Franco brilliantly united the Carlists militarily and the Phalange by appealing to their shared Catholic faith and Spanish identity, as well as promising the restoration of the monarchy. Squabbles naturally still happened, but these different sides were still united because they saw the Republicans as a greater threat to Spanish civilization. The Republicans, on the other hand, let's see, you had liberal Democrats, social democrats, anarchists, and 2 different variants of communism, all living under the same roof with practically no unifying factor other than ideology. As Stanley G. Payne in his book about the Spanish Civil War wrote, it went as you could expect. Quote, "The Popular Front largely ceased to exist as an organized coalition once the elections were over, and was divided between the Republican left and the worker left, most of which was now oriented toward revolution. This situation, rather than weakening the revolutionary process, in some respects enhanced it. The Republican left had burned all bridges with the center and right, and could remain in power only by ceding more and more to the worker parties. Rather than being restrained by the Republican left, those parties consistently blackmailed it, with ever-increasing effectiveness. Their refusal to compromise with the center or right left them no alternative. Complete leftist sectarianism inevitably led to Kerenskyism." Now, this ideological foundation for leftist ideologies wouldn't be too bad, unless it is paired up with another thing, a specific worldview. This is especially the case for Marxism. Communism doesn't just tell you how society should be run, like the proletariat controls the means of production and that's it. But in addition to this, Marxism also tells you how you should look at and analyze the world around you. At the heart of Marxism lies a focus on materialism and class, and both of these things shape how something is going to be seen through Marxist theory. The ideology already decides for you how you are going to look at a certain thing. The ideological aspect overrides the desire for a more objective and nuanced understanding. Now, think of the Russia-Ukraine war. People are gonna point out that this war happened because both countries have different interests and ambitions that are colliding with one another, so on and so on. And then Marxists will show up like, how can I make this about class? This is why Marxists have an entire theory about history called historical materialism, that history is driven by who owns the means of production and the conflict between the bourgeois and the proletariat, yada yada yada. This is why when you confront Marxists about the Soviet Union engaging in imperialism by invading countries, they will butt in with their own Marxist interpretation of imperialism and go, imperialism is when the 1% want more profits and invade other countries to get richer. The Soviet Union invaded countries to liberate the working class, so it cannot be called imperialism. That's the line of thinking Hakim used when describing why the Soviet Union invaded Poland in 1939, how Polish landowners were exploiting ethnic minorities, and thus the East needed to be invaded to save them. Have a look.
The USSR leadership's original justification given for the invasion of Poland was to regain lands lost in the Treaty of Riga, which concluded the 1919 and 1921 Polish-Bolshevik War. Ukraine and Belarus, then a part of the USSR, were invaded by Poland in their attempt to re-establish the borders of the Polish Empire of 1772. In the treaty, the Polish border was established by Britain and the US at 200 miles east of the Curzon Line. However, due to the march of time and the migrations of people that occurred during previous eras, the lands acquired by Poland were no longer ethnically Polish, but were mainly Ukrainian and Belarusian. Therefore, Poland was seen as an occupier or colonial power even in these regions by minority groups. The motivations to invade Poland expressed by the Red Army, however, were quite different. They claimed they were compelled to counter the invasion by Germany and liberate the Polish proletariat and oppressed minorities.
Or another interesting incident that occurred in the Italian parliament in 1925, when Italian communist Antonio Gramsci went up against Benito Mussolini. This whole entire transcript reads like a Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney trial. This part in particular is most interesting. Actually, since I already made that Phoenix Wright joke, this is how it basically went. I am not kidding, this is unironically what he said in response. When a variant of another ideology emerges, like let's say libertarianism and paleo-libertarianism, the libertarians will recognize that the paleo still share their libertarian views, but have some differences in doctrine, and generally they will get along, because they recognize and accept that the other half has some doctrinal differences. But in the case of Marxism, if another variant emerges, they will treat it as some kind of blasphemy and then write paragraphs about how the other side is full of filthy revisionists who have deviated from Marxist doctrine, and the other side claims the exact same thing. So the two sides will go into an eternal squabble on who has the purest interpretation of Marxism and have the most dialectical understanding. They do that because their ideology demands that of them. They cannot comprehend the idea that another revolutionary interpretation can exist, that there can only be one. Take the conflict between Trotskyism and Stalinism as an example. You would think that such a bloody rivalry between two revolutionary Marxist ideas came about because one completely deviated from Marxist doctrine and created something new. But nope. The only major difference between Stalinism and Trotskyism is that Stalinism advocates for the concept of socialism in one country, where socialism should be built up in one country first to serve as a role model, and Trotskyism advocates for permanent revolution, that revolution should occur spontaneously internationally without waiting for one country to achieve it. This eternal blood feud is literally fought over whose idea of spreading socialism is best, and that is literally it. And then we have the case of fascism. Just like communism, fascism is a revolutionary ideology that is also based on ideological doctrines. So why has fascism never really had these problems? It's simple really. Fascism is nationalist while communism is internationalist. Fascists recognize that fascism will be different in each country due to the different societal and cultural aspects each nation possesses. And because of that, there is not a lot of reasons why, for example, Italian fascism and Spanish falangism would squabble much. They both recognize and accept their differences. Even Mussolini himself said as much in his newspaper, how fascism cannot be exported internationally as a standard model. So whenever there is fascist infighting, it will be because of two different forms of fascism competing over the same country. The complete opposite is the case for communism, because it is internationalist, as they all believe that the whole world should adopt their ideas. Due to that, they are all in an eternal competition with one another, because they are fighting over the same territory, i.e. the world. The same is the case for more moderate leftist ideologies, although not to such a radical extent like Marxism. According to a Nature Communication study on the topic of ideological differences in the expanse of moral circles, it discovered that the more liberal a person is, the more universalist they are, and the more conservative a person is, the more nationalist they are. And those identifying as liberal or very liberal identify more with the entirety of humanity rather than a country or community. And this universalist worldview is definitely a contributing factor to the amount of infighting, while conservatives can and will accept different ideas as long as they are prominent in another country. The fun part is over, kids. It is time for us to delve into the field of psychology, the worst of the sciences, right after colostomy diuretics. This is a point made by the YouTuber The Manic Pineapple, who is doing the exact same thing I am doing, trying to explain why there is so much leftist infighting. And the point made by him is pretty interesting, so I felt like including it here. But if you wanna see the full explanation, I highly recommend watching the video, it's definitely worth it. In his book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, author Jonathan Haidt points out that one is able to quickly identify who stands where politically by asking them a moral dilemma. For example, is it okay for a man to take an already dead chicken home with him and make love to it? Those who identify with the left side of the political spectrum usually respond with something like, the chicken was already dead and the man is doing it with his own home in private, or, you know, how does this affect you personally? And those identifying with the right side of the political spectrum naturally think that this is wrong in any case, a stance the majority of my viewers would agree with. There are many more moral dilemmas Haidt presents, but you get the point. He had found that in the 6 ethical lenses, which are care, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty, conservatives were spread across the board on what they care about, but leftists were mainly concentrated in the categories of care and fairness. This means that they are not great at understanding or sympathizing with other ethical lenses beyond care and fairness. So, what does this have to do with leftist infighting? The minds of conservatives are hardwired to value loyalty just as much as, for example, care and fairness, but leftists lack this value for loyalty and stick mainly to those two categories. This means that it is significantly harder for progressives to stay loyal to a specific political party to keep up momentum, and why they love canceling people for the mildest things. It's because they have almost no sense of loyalty loyalty. They could be watching a YouTuber for their whole life, buying their merch and so forth. But the moment it turns out that this YouTuber said the N-word sometime in private, they will switch sides faster than a 15-year-old girl changing her gender on Tumblr. And because they are hardwired for the sense of moral purity and superiority, and because they absolutely do not care about things like loyalty and group cohesion, nothing is stopping them from going absolutely wild against their own when they do or say something horrible. This isn't something they are fully aware of either, nor do they necessarily choose this. Their brain chemistry simply does not value the one thing required to keep the left together and unified. It is much more satisfying and rewarding to out your fellow leftist as a horrible person. Considering everything, it is pretty obvious as to why there is so much infighting among the left. Their only unifying factor is ideology and social values. They have a universalist or internationalist view of the world, and their brain is hardwired in such a way to not value loyalty as much as moral purity. And when these three things are combined into one consciousness, you get a group of people that receives more happy brain chemicals by beating to death a fellow progressive lefty than a conservative righty. This way of thinking inevitably leads to a kind of humanitarianism, but one that struggles to find stability. When people deny God and the soul, they create an anthropocentric view, which then starts to see humanity as equivalent to nature. This humanitarianism, which starts with a premise that man is God, eventually descends into the law of the jungle. The modern leftist mentality isn't exactly gentle or loving. Their tendency to uphold ideological purity over basic humanity makes them prone to sadistic and horrendous acts, as the history books have shown. And as long as this mentality, this worldview, is ingrained into their brains, leftist unity will be nothing more than a fantasy.